we'd be willing to put a list of recommendations together and submit that to the board. I think if we can define a process, post it in the paper, invite people who might be interested, take that list of candidates, and then as a board we can go through and decide based on the response, the composition, how many members could be on the board, and start creating a committee. At least that would be my recommendation.
I agree with Eric that because of the sensitivity of this issue and as much reaction that is received, we need to have a well drawn out, understood, publicly disclosed process, publicized process to choose membership or it could backfire.
So we need to put that out in a public notice, correct? So that we can, draft some people to help us eliminate these problems. So that would be our next step then, is to put that a public notice that we are looking for people to man this committee, if you will.
Yeah, define an application period, who they send it to, whether it's Karen or the airport manager, whoever we designate. But we have a clear set of application period, who they respond to, what the definition is, and then afterwards at the end we gather.
I think it's a great idea. I just don't, I hope that we don't drag it out for months. I would hope that we could get a response and a committee together, and if it means that we have to meet again this month, then so be it. But we really need to move forward on it, because there's a lot of other things that we need to spend our time on too. And this is kind of mounting to about to put this behind us moving forward.
I think the scope should be well defined also, so they know what they're signing up for, opposed to just signing up for something even with the airport.
Well, I think it's probably important that we discuss that a little bit because there may have been some slight confusion. Because I believe that the council is going to take up the leasing policy for review.
Yeah, it'll be on the agenda probably the 6th of April.
Okay.
First Thursday in April. April 3rd.
Okay. So I was under the impression that we recommended that document essentially is complete, that work is complete. We started this process in order to have a document in place that we can use. And it was somewhat sidetracked with the future lease recommendation. Is there any reason for that document to continue to be in a holding pattern pending this long process?
No, I think that was we're going to move forward with the document, and then as time, that will ultimately get approval. I would suspect, barring any objections from council, that could be approved as early as April 3rd. But then, with this technical committee, we'll just make amendments to that existing document based on their recommendations to us and what we recommend to council.
Yeah. So okay. So I agree with Jeff that if we had agreed to, based on the recommendation of consultants, what the composition is of that working committee. If we agree with that, if we want to change that, we need to discuss it. But if we agree with that, I think we should somehow figure out a process to solicit recommendations from either within the board or outside the board for membership for review. And like Jeff said, we really need to know exactly what the purpose of this thing is. And there's probably wide confusion about what we're trying to do. But the more open-ended you leave it, the more disastrous it's going to be. And the other part of it is the supposed facilitator. I mean, you're not going to get anything done unless you have somebody running the show. And how we define that? Is this a paid facilitator? Is this a paid consultant? Is this, who is this person that's going to manage this process? In my opinion, that's what we need to come up with, or where this thing's not going.
My input, but let me just clarify a little bit. And correct me if I'm, off base or not. It might be a little deceiving if you haven't been involved in the beginning of what we keep calling the JViation study. It's a document that actually puts in order a lot of procedures. It's not just the lease of hangars has become the hot item, but there's development, how you build a building in there, how things are going to grow from the future. So we're trying to get a policy that gets everything in order, so it's not hodgepodge and different from one and another. It becomes a policy that's the same for all. So I think we've worked pretty hard at that, and I think we have a very good document before the council right now. And the modification, the only modification to it will be on the table at this point would be how to deal with the existing leases as they come up. What will be the policy for that? So we need to add back in language of how to deal with those as they come out. That's the policy going to be.
Just as an addendum in the future to that document.
Yeah, it's in addition to clarify, because we pulled out 3 or 4 meetings back, we pulled that out to deal with it later. So we need to bring, we're dealing with it later now, and we need to bring it back and create the policy to add to the policies that's before the board right now. So it's not changing what's going before the board right now. It's in addition to what we said we needed further discussion. And at the time, I think it was pretty strong to say let's at least get approved what we have now and get it before council so we can keep going with things that were before us at this point. So that's just a little history of what the board's been through for the last 6 months. And that's what any
No, Mel, I mean, the reason this thing started is because there was a request, I believe, for a extension of some sorts. And we did not have a process to evaluate it one way or the other. So in the past, in a somewhat arbitrary fashion, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but there wasn't anything about it. And these are documents that are pretty standard in airports, well-run airports throughout the country, to include rules and regulation documents, to include minimum standards. So that's the reason that started. It's not necessarily to address the end of lease provisions. That sort of crept in there and created some problems, but it was just to set a very basic, very well understood process for applications for extensions based on capital investment, for applications for commercial services, for grounds for denial for commercial services if they are a safety issue or the city has decided that we don't want to engage in those type of activities. So it formalizes that so that there's less ambiguity and there's less chance of going one way or the other based on arbitrary, not well thought out decisions. That was the reason for this document. And most of this material in the document is exactly that. And it's important for the city, it's important for commercial operators, and important for the public because it sets a set of standards, if you will, or regulations that are understood. The focus has been on this end of lease provision, but quite frankly, that was not the reason that thing started in the first place. It's important to answer that question, but not necessarily to answer it within that document.
And if you misunderstood me, I didn't mean to say that's why it started. I concur exactly with what you said. What came out of it, now how do we deal with the end of leases, and we need to deal with that too. So,
2 separate items.
2 separate items. So,
What has been approved by this board to be forwarded to the city council is a good document. That this board agrees is a good document. This end of lease term is going to be an addendum to that document.
But I thought the concerns of the hangar owners was the fact that there wasn't enough airports that were analyzed in that JViation report. It wasn't so much what the outcome was, it was the fact that there were only 6 airports analyzed instead of 40 that another airport had done to get some of the same information that you were trying to glean out of this report. So I'm not questioning the outcome of the report. My concern is that it wasn't as rigorous of a report as most airports do.
Can I answer that question? Pretty good.
Yeah, I'll let me comment, and you can make your comment, please. You asked 2 questions there, I think, Tracy.
Okay.
One, the airport board went through a number of things to, at the end, some of the concerns was there was just, how the report came out at the end was a big concern for a number of the board members, because it didn't reflect some of the information that had been put to us before. And so, you know, the recommendation was definitely different than probably how the report was written, but that's why the board's here. And so, we sorted through it, made the recommendation that we thought was appropriate, and we still stand by it. We think we did a pretty thorough job of it. And so what's before, to answer your question, Nadim explained pretty well of the other policies and procedures that were in there. The question came down, what type of leases are we going to go forward with? Before we made the recommendation, and we recommended non-reversionary. So that's the big change in the report. The rest of it is procedures of keeping a standard in the airport, so we have nice looking buildings like we do. We have things handled out there very well. And you know, everybody has a big investment. So, go ahead.
Yeah, that accusation of there not being enough airports is for the purpose of discrediting the report, because somebody has a different agenda. Meaning that the particular part of the recommendation out of the report is not palatable to somebody, to a group of people. So it's a little bit of an oblique way to discredit it. The fact is, when you contract out with consultants, you have a set budget. It's not an unlimited budget. You have a certain scope that you want. And what you choose to sample ties into the budget. Grand Junction is 50 times larger than Hebrew. So within the confines of a reasonable budget for an airport in a city like this, it does not make any sense to go out and sample 40, 50 airports. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of man hours. You take a $8,000 project and you make it $30,000. The information presented, and this will come up through the working groups, but the information presented regarding that study as well as regarding Grand Junction is not as it first appears to be. Upon further probing, we'll find out that some of those facts were not true and also potentially very problematic to existing hangar owners. But that's why we need to go through that process. But that claim, I think, was disingenuous. I think it's hurtful to the airport board's ability to work with consultants. It was certainly very hurtful to JViation's reputation, undeserved. They did a good job. They did what we asked them to do. These guys have been around in the aviation business for 30 plus years. Greg Sparks ran the Denver office. So for him to be discredited that way publicly, both on the internet and also in here, is problematic for the board going forward. And I think people making that charge, at some point ought to be held accountable for making that happen. Because it's very hard. They won't come back here to do this stuff because of that issue. But it does not change the fact that what they were chartered to do and the results they came out with, although imperfect, because the process is not as clear and smooth as people think it should be looking at it from the outside. You go into certain bumps and you go, well, this is not being necessarily quite what we wanted to do, and you refine it and you direct them in a certain way. But the end result of what they did was within the scope of what we asked them to do. Not pleasing to everybody, but sufficiently pleasing for what they were tasked to do. I think it's important to. I don't know if everybody feels that way on the board, but I think it's important for that to go on the record.
I don't agree with exactly what Nadim said. I think JViation got tasked to do things they were not hired to do, and a lot more work. And I think it wasn't a good deal. And it's not proper to crucify JViation. I think it's. Let me talk, please. JViation was basically told what to put in the report, and we as a board told them not take input from others, do the report, bring it back to us. That wasn't done. That's where I have a problem with it. I did my own research outside of the report, full of holes. So Nadim is right. That, you know what? People have certain interests in it. That's why we have a balance on the board of how it goes, so that the proper things get forward. It's okay. He has a different opinion than me. He has a different opinion than me. We all, at the end of the day, have to put it forward and take all the input and then make the recommendation, and guess what? The legislative body gets to decide. So, it is not right what happened to JViation. And when the board released them, that's what they were telling. At least that's what I told them.
Yeah, even just putting aside any kind of agendas or any accusations, the fact of the matter is, to address your point, Tracy, we had a budget to do a survey of 10 airports. And so we actually, as a council, we're the ones who identified which airports we wanted them to survey. And with our approval, we submitted that list. I think had we had the budget to do a more comprehensive survey, which would have included more than 10, I think we would have liked to. But with the budget we had, that's all we could afford.
Eric, I think they picked the 10 airports and we approved.
Well, I actually remember when they asked for solicitation from us, what airports did they want us to include?
Yeah, we went through a pretty detailed discussion and eliminated and added some stuff within the certain